What in the world is going on with Xbox? That's what we're going to cover in this video. And this will be probably less about what's actually happening, because if you're watching this, you've probably heard of what's going on. I want to kind of break through and kind of pick apart all of the different rumors and actual statements from Xbox and things that people seem to just be making up, and kind of talk about why all those things are essentially a big blob right now. So let's get into it. At the end of the day, I'll be happy if this video gets like 200 views. I'm not a big channel. I don't have a big name in the industry. More than anything, I've probably annoyed more people than I've reached. And I kind of accept that. That's fine. I'll survive if that's my current legacy as a hobbyist gaming content creator that likes Xbox and Mass Effect and The Division, right? But I still think it is worth talking about, or maybe I just feel like I need to blow off some steam and go over everything that's happening with Xbox right now. We had kind of this surprise move, essentially, a few months ago of Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond leaving on their own, maybe not. We'll probably never really know until they do their memoirs one day. But one way or the other, they were gone really suddenly. And then they were replaced by this person who wasn't part of the games industry, is relatively young, and came from this, or how people perceived it as a AI background with Asha Sharma. And now that person has brought in this team of people, people who were skeptical of Xbox's strategy for the last so many years, and other like industry vets or just tech industry vets. And we've seen a bunch of stuff happen. I don't really want to talk about that in this video. I want to talk about what's happened ever since the showcase and the first 100 days and everything that's happened since. Because I think that from a meta overhead point of view, things are still really good. And even the things they're talking about right now and the potential things on the horizon for Xbox, which may be good and bad, will end up being good for the company in the long run. So the first thing to address, these rumors that are flying around right now, that Xbox is considering restructuring itself, or Microsoft is going to restructure it, to the potential of spinning it off into its own company and disconnecting entirely, to rumors of them treating them kind of like LinkedIn or GitHub, where Microsoft owns those companies, but they run themselves. They're just kind of, still like a division, but not, directly controlled by Satya Nadella and, the Amy Hood and the people, the executives at Microsoft. They run their own business and they're expected to be profitable on their own. They just get some of the like overhead support of Microsoft. To potentially doing like a co-ownership of Xbox with another player. Like the rumor I've seen and heard about is Netflix, that Netflix and Microsoft would be kind of co-owners of Xbox and would run it together. Right? Anything's possible, right? They're obviously in a season of change right now. We just had in the last couple of days the leader of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, come out and say that after 25 years, Xbox has to become a profitable and self-sustaining business. That's too many people going to come off as kind of annoying to hear, especially under his reign, when Xbox has tacitly received support when it comes to allowing them to spend $70 billion on ABK and other investments, but also hasn't been allowed to do things that would have been good for the business in the long run. Right now, they can't make enough hardware to satisfy probably a fairly, medium amount of demand for their product, and they still can't meet those numbers because they're paying so much for the hardware to make current Xboxes, because they didn't set up long-term deals to get ahead of this RAM crisis and storage crisis that we're having on the PC hardware side. So now, that whole, that's a whole different conversation, but Xbox has now said, one of the executives said that they can't make enough Xboxes to satisfy demand. When everyone rolls their eyes at that, like, well, yeah, all the demand for Xbox. Well, something to consider is that the demand may not be that high for Xboxes right now, and they still can't meet that. Like, that's the problem. And then we've seen other reports recently of, the Xboxes right now, everyone they sell, and they're not selling that many of them, is costing Microsoft and Xbox a ton of money, hundreds of dollars per unit. even after the price jump to 650 for the Series X. And that's because, or at least it presumably because, in the last few years, and especially in the last couple of years with the previous regime of leadership, they weren't letting them do things like make long-term contracts on, the current consoles even. And then that gets into a whole different conversation about the next-gen consoles, which, I don't think should be coming in 2027. I think that's going to be a nightmare for everyone, for players because of the cost, and for Xbox because of the cost. But the spinning off thing, like it's just a rumor, and that could always happen. Something that a lot of people don't remember or even know is that back in 2016, that's what Sony did to PlayStation. If you have ever heard of, the reference to the Sony Interactive Entertainment, SIE, that is a subsidiary, that is a spin-off company of Sony. Obviously Sony owns PlayStation and very likely has decision-making control over high-level things. But the same thing that they're talking about with Xbox is what has already happened with PlayStation, and probably should have happened with Xbox a really long time ago, if we're being honest. It should have been kind of pushed out of the nest a while ago to survive on its own, and with gaming people in charge instead of corporate executives. It may have done better in the long run, the Xbox One generation and even more of the Series X generation. So that's one whole big thing. And then we got this news that came straight from Asha Sharma and their team about how they're going to end this fiscal year at like a 3% accountability margin. And the reason that's important, and the reason it's amazing that they shared that information, is because I'm under the impression that whatever corporate things that they can do with their money, they could have had all of the money they spent over the last year on Xbox, they could have put it into like a high yield savings account or a bond or whatever, and made 3.6% interest on that money. They would have made more money taking all of the money they spent on Xbox for the last year and just leaving it in the bank, and it would have made more profit. And that's a problem, right? Like, that's not good. Now, that also comes off the heels of knowing that the previous year, 2025, that the fiscal year that ended then, was Xbox's most profitable year ever. So like, there is this like doom and gloom, and there's this like conversation happening that's ignoring that part of the conversation. These big giant companies like Xbox, they're so big that they can go from one of their best years ever to one of their worst years ever in 1 year. That's just how this thing works. And most people have made the pretty, I think, reasonable point of, well, yeah, Call of Duty had a bad year. And that is probably the difference. Like, a lot of people don't realize that basically all of Xbox's profit right now is typically Call of Duty and Game Pass. Game Pass makes a lot more money than even Activision Blizzard King does. It's a hugely profitable thing. That's why when they talked about recently that $30 a month price jump, and it lost, I think they said like 20% of subscribers, that's a big deal. That probably didn't get rid of the profit that Game Pass makes, but it probably cut it down to pretty paper thin numbers, where before that 20% drop, they were probably pulling in crazy money through that. So, and I'm sure they've recovered a decent amount of that, but probably not 20%. They probably aren't back to where they were. And I think that's probably a big problem for them. But that margin was a big deal for them to reveal. That doesn't typically happen. The new and current hardware, it feels like every week there's a rumor of, oh, they're rethinking Helix, and it's not going to be a PC now. It's just going to be a traditional console, and it may not have as much RAM as people thought it was going to have. And even the current consoles may raise in price again, which they could. If it's true that they're losing hundreds of dollars per Series X or even Series S, if the plan is to make more of them and put more of them out in the next year or two while we wait for Helix, then they're gonna, in order to make more, they're gonna have to stop losing so much money on them. So we might see them raise the price of a Series X to 700, 750. The Series S from, I think it's 400 now. When that, at one point, I remember seeing Series S's for like $200 on sale at one point back earlier in the generation. I'm pretty sure. Now they're 400 and could go higher. We may end up seeing Series S's the same price as Series X's were when they launched 6 years ago. It's crazy. But then we see new rumors I just saw recently of, actually they may be able to release a cheaper Xbox this year, And how are they going to do that if they're already losing their butt on the already price jumped Series X's in the current gen, right? And all of this stuff, it's so confusing, and it's so, you can get lost in it so quickly because none of it's really exact. None of it's very true. As much as people dog on Xbox for being too vague and not informative enough and all that, like, I don't think they really are that bad about it. It's just, so many rumors swirl and so much BS gets put out there, and, all of that, that it's easy to mix it all up. And I think, the general consumer has no idea this stuff is going on. 90% of the people who buy PlayStation 5s or Xboxes or Nintendo Switches and things like that don't even know all this stuff is happening. They go to work and they go home, they spend time with their families and they do their hobbies and they play with their kids and they spend time with their, significant others or friends or they sit and stare at the wall in continuous despair of where their lives are going and how pointless and monotonous everything is. And then they play games for a little bit. They don't sit there like us, like me, like anyone who's probably watching this video who just pays attention to this stuff every single day of the week, most of the day, or at least too much of the day, right? So like those kind of people, the normal people out there may pick up every now and then some of this news is happening, but they don't get this day-to-day stuff like someone like me gets just bombarded with, right? Because I'm seeking it, like I'm looking out for it, right? And I think that's when you start to see this huge difference between people and how they look at what's going on with Xbox or the games industry in general. And that there's like 3% of us who like are hyper focused on this. And then there's like 7% who are like more than casual, but maybe not as in it. And then like 90% of people are just doing their own thing, right? And are completely oblivious to this stuff, and good for them. And I mean, you have stuff like that with like, the current consoles are a mess. They're still talking about, this Helix console coming out in 2027. Like, what are we doing here? Like, they aren't expecting the RAM and storage issue, to go down. Asha Sharma herself said in this letter recently that they expect it to be, currently prices are 2 times what they were for this hardware. And by 2027, they're expecting it to be 5 times as expensive as it was in 2025. It's 2 times right now. They're expecting it to be 5 times more expensive next year. Like they won't even be able to make series consoles. PlayStation won't be able to make theirs unless they did get those contracts locked up where the prices are more reasonable for a while. But if they signed those deals recently, they probably aren't very long. They're probably for like a year, because these manufacturing companies aren't going to, give them a solid, let them have a 5-year contract and, get completely undercut for the next 5 years. Like, this is going to affect everyone. Then we have this idea of, this PlayStation 6 or this series, this Xbox Helix or whatever, having like 40 gigs of DRAM in it and stuff like that. Like that much RAM right now is like $600 on its own. And that's if DDR5. It's probably not. It's probably, they would probably be shooting for faster RAM. And so then you're talking about, probably $1,000 just on RAM for these consoles. You're not talking about CPU yet. You're not talking about GPU stuff yet. You're talking about like $2,000 consoles, like that, and that's just not going to happen. And the reason that's frustrating is we've also recently got messaging from Xbox that they know $1,000 console won't sell. So where do we go? So what's going on, right? And I think if you only paid attention to things that Microsoft are saying or Xbox are saying, you would have a clearer picture, because they aren't saying much. And instead, all of us, including myself, get so lost in these rumors and speculation and leaks, with quotes, that it's so easy to feel like the message is confusing, to feel like everything's crazy, when if you just weren't so lost in it all, it wouldn't be. It would maybe not be as informative as you prefer, but it just isn't as confusing as people seem to want it to be. And then, then we have the whole stuff with exclusive games. Like, oh, it's so confusing. Like, not really. There's 2 exclusive games to Xbox coming out in the next year, and they're going to do more. And they're going to honor their previous agreements. That's why, and supposedly, they didn't even want to honor it with like Fable and Halo Combat Evolved, but due to contractual things and how much it would cost to pull back on these deals with PlayStation, stuff like that, they're just going to go through with it. But it seems like basically Xbox first-party multiplayer games will likely stay, or multiplayer-focused games will likely stay multi-platform, and non-multi-platform games, single-player games or single player focused games will become exclusive. Now there's all kinds of hypocrisies to that right now. We have like the Senua game that's coming out is going to be a single player game, but it's going to be multi-platform. That's probably because that was already decided and they can't change it at this point. It's just too much work, too much money to change it. And then we have games like, State of Decay 3. That's a multiplayer game. I saw people arguing that why is State of Decay 3 going to be multi-platform? It's not a live service game. State of Decay 2 might be one of the best supported live service games ever made, up there with No Man's Sky and any of the other ones you would name off that I can't think of in the moment, right? It's not that confusing if you accept that we just aren't going to know everything. It's not our right to know Xbox's word by word, day by day strategy for the next 10 years. And I get why people want to know that stuff, because people are worried about, should I buy a new Xbox if they're going to shut down Xbox in a year, which doesn't seem likely. How much should I invest in this platform if I can't feel confident? I would say, most of the same people would say that, yeah, there's PlayStation's going to be around 10 years from now. And because of maybe bad messaging or strategy from Xbox, but also because of, media being kind of weird about this stuff, content creators, influencers, I think intentionally muddying the waters. You probably wouldn't find as many people say the same thing about Xbox, that it's going to be around in 10 years. So I kind of get that, but a lot of that is manufactured and it's sensational and it's not real. A lot of this, bad news for Xbox, and every time you see these articles and stuff, it really isn't. That's just the way it's being construed. That's the way it's being portrayed, right? Now we have, these rumors about layoffs and studios shuttering, all because of this blog that got posted by Asha Sharma about their strategy and how they need to reset the brand and do all this stuff. And sure, layoffs and studio closures are possible, but you see all of this reporting on that blog that was done, basically citing the blog and then citing layoffs and studio closures, even though the blog says nothing about that. And there's been some rumors from people saying that they hear that's going to happen, but that happens all the time. That happened earlier this year, that layoffs and studio closures were, stated that they were going to happen, and then it never did. And maybe it does happen this time. I don't know. We don't know. Maybe that blog that they put out in this reset of Xbox does mean those things are going to happen, but it's not happened yet. And there's no solid reason to believe it's going to. Studios like Compulsion and Double Fine and some of these little boutique studios they have that, there's no way they make money. They surely only lose money. And this isn't really a time in the industry where having feel good stories is going to be good for your bottom line, and your bottom line matters a lot right now when money is expensive to borrow, when, things are expensive in general, hardware and everything, and people are expensive. It's the time for those kind of studios isn't really right now. And so there's rumors that they're going to condense their lineup down to really focusing on getting a new Halo game out soon, a new Fallout game soon, getting Gears games out faster and things like that. That makes sense. I could see that be true. But then how do you do that if you're also saying that you're going to cut the company down by a bunch? Yeah, sure, I don't expect Compulsion to help with a new Gears of War game, and maybe they will see the way of the birds, but that there's no guarantee in reporting that implies that that's absolutely definitely going to happen, and there's proof from what Xbox said when they never said that. Again, it's muddying the waters. We have this whole idea of, the same thing happened with Matt Ball, who's one of the new executives. He did an interview with Chris Dring, and then in Chris Dring's summary of the interview, he mentioned in-game ads, and then had literally hundreds of thousands of outlets and journalists and influencers and content creators quote tweeted and shared and made videos about this guy saying that they were going to put in-game ads in Xbox games to help make it more affordable and help Xbox make more money. And then, Matt Ball comes out and says, I never said anything about in-game ads. And but that doesn't matter. 1% of the people who saw the in-game ads sensationalism will see Matt Ball say, no, I didn't say that. I meant more like paid tiers of Game Pass and things like that, where, you may have ads in your menus or something like that, more so than we already do. But that's not the message that's popular or that people, want to write articles about or make videos about. I I get that there's like a lot of anxiety because there's new leadership at Xbox for the first time in a long time. They've had kind of a rough couple years, kind of by their own doing or by the doing of those above them. And now there's someone in here who looks like they're trying to set things in the right direction, who's trying to recover this, who's trying to fix things, which may sometimes involve things that people don't like. And maybe it'll involve some things that people do like as well, right? But, you know, there's been this whole like 100-day thing. And even Asha Sharma talked about it in some interviews about how, you know, they did a bunch of great things in that first 100 days. And now their next 100 days is about, you know, resetting the brand and trying to put it on a better path. And while that may involve some things that people don't like layoffs, studio closures and stuff, you know, they aren't doing it for fun. They aren't doing it because they feel like being evil, right? Especially at that level, maybe above them. You can make that argument, but that's a different video. I really am frustrated by all the discourse because it's useless. Here's my advice. I'll try to wrap this up and end this rant, this mini podcast this way. Basically, be careful of anything you see from any major outlet or any notable games journalist, because at the end of the day, they want Xbox around and they want Xbox to be bad. If Xbox becomes good, it's bad for them because it's harder to write articles and that clickbait goes away. If Xbox goes away, they're super screwed because they hate talking about PlayStation, good or bad, you know, it seems like. So be careful of the sources of the info you see, for the love of God, especially in like, you know, like normie, you know, like consumer conversations on social media and stuff. If you see someone that has the Xbox logo in their profile picture or their banner, or they have the PlayStation logo in either of those, or any corporate, you know, banners or at least profile pictures, just ignore them, mute them, block them, whatever. These people are adding nothing to the discourse. If you're online as dumbly as I am and as much as I am, you really have to, and I hate it that it's the way things are now. You do have to like narrow your vision to people who are having like real conversations, who are actually informed, who are coming at this from an honest angle, who really do want to either talk about this or have real info, because like 99% of the conversation happening right now just seems like it's either people trolling or engagement baiting for money, and maybe trolling for money too. I really hate where the whole games conversation is right now. I think this is reflected in other places as well. Politics and geopolitics and, you know, just society and culture in general. I feel like we're dealing with a lot of these same issues. You know, this issue in gaming is kind of a microcosm of a larger problem. And hopefully this stuff works its way out as, you know, humans learn to deal with this internet thing and all that, because we're obviously still struggling with it, maybe more than ever. Just be careful, be thoughtful, you know, be genuine, you know, don't just say mean things because it feels you get a little dopamine rush, you know, try to remember the person on the other side of that screen, but we'll see. If you like this, if you want more Xbox videos, more gaming videos, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button so more people see it, leave a comment, let me know what you're thinking. If you really want to support what I'm doing here, consider becoming a YouTube member for as little as $1 a month. You get videos like this one a bit early. You also get some other perks. If you want to see the other content I make, see other ways to support what I'm doing, like buying merch, look at the links in the description of the video. That is all I've got for this one. So until next time.